I'm excited to welcome Erin Kyan to the podcast. Erin is the writer, producer, director, editor, and the voice of Jason for the Love and Luck podcast. Erin describes himself as a fat, queer, disabled trans man who is the driving force behind Love and Luck. He lives with his partner and co-producer Lee in St. Kilda with their two cats, Tribble and Boop. A writer and speaker who turns his attention to many different media, Erin performs original spoken word pieces a few times a year, periodically speaks on panels about disability and queer issues, and occasionally writes small interactive fiction games and publishes a small personal and poetic monthly mini-zine called Floodlight Viscera. Welcome, Erin.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Oh, we're thrilled to have you. Love and Luck has become my favorite new podcast.
Oh, thank you.
And we should say, as we're recording this now in middle October, and we're not airing until middle December through the scheduling things. But through those first episodes, it's just been wonderful.
Oh, thank you. That's really good to hear. We've received a lot of really nice tweets saying how it's nice to have something just kind of warm and fuzzy to listen to, which has been really nice.
So what was the inspiration behind this? The show itself has been described in its press materials as fictional radio play podcast told via voicemails, and it's a slice of life of a queer romance story with a touch of magic. So where did all that come from?
Well, for starters, I can say we use the phrase slice of life because it doesn't turn people off like soap opera does, which is probably a little bit more accurate to what it is. But people have a bit of a bad reaction to the phrase soap opera. But, that's kind of what it is. Inspiration. Where do I start? So I was going through a very hard time when I started writing it. I was having a lot of difficulties. And I needed something to focus on to keep my mind off, the bad stuff I was going through. And so I was like, all right, well, this was in late October last year, 2016. And I was like, well, NaNoWriMo is coming up. And I have a lot of friends who do NaNoWriMo. Maybe I'll do it too. So then I made that decision 4 days before November started. And was like, okay, now I have to come up with an outline and an idea in 4 days, which I managed to do. I wrote 20,000 words in my outline in that 4 days, which I still don't actually know physically how I did that.
Wow.
And in terms, initially I was like, all right, well, what am I going to write? And I was like, well, I've been really interested in podcasting for a while. And I love audio drama podcasts. So I was like, something like that would be really cool. Because I haven't done podcasting before. I'm a very learn by doing sort of person. So I was like, I want to learn how to make a podcast. I think I'll make a podcast. I went, all right, let's write a script for a podcast. So then I was like, all right, well, what kind of script? And I have a very, very deep love of, I don't know what the technical term is for it. I just call it found article style storytelling, where you find pieces of information from like fictional first sources. So like audio logs, diaries, notes, stuff like that, letters, like that kind of stuff. I love that kind of storytelling. So I knew I wanted to do something like that. And I wanted to keep my production possible. So I had to limit the voice actors as much as I could. The scope increased dramatically over the next few months. But initially, the idea was, well, I can write a love story between two men and me and my partner can voice it. Mm-hmm. Which is still true. That's still what we did. It just got bigger than that. So I thought, all right, well, what's a way I can make an interesting found article story? And I thought of voicemails because I was trying to think of like audio things you might find. And I'm a big gamer, and so audio logs are a really normalized part of storytelling for me. So I was like, well, I can't really do audio logs because I want to do something a bit more present day. And most people don't go around recording every thought onto a, tape recorder. Although I wish they did, because that would be great. So I was like, all right, voicemails, and I was like, let's write in voicemails. It'll be fun. And it was fun actually to write. A little bit tricky sometimes because with voicemails you're not at the action, you're around the action,
Mm-hmm.
and trying to figure out how I can show what's happening without just switching to a sort of real time performance. Um, God, I've gotten off track. I've already forgotten the question. I'm just going to keep talking.
Well, I think 'cause
Um,
going specifically off what you just said, because you did kind of hint around your inspirations and stuff,
yes.
but that was something that struck me in the episodes that I've heard. You're finding ways to slip in little things about Jason and Kane and making them sound natural in a voicemail exchange, but yet it's something that if I were reading a narrative,
Oh yeah,
I
like
would just pick up that information because it would come between the quotes.
yeah, exactly. Like I'm trying to think of an example and I've forgotten my entire script. Um, but like we do, things like Jason likes to party. Like normally you would show that in a narrative by having him go to parties and hang out and stuff. But in this one, it's more like, hey, do you want to come to this with me? Do you want to come to that with me? Oh, I had a great time at X. And of course the drunk voicemails, which were my favorite thing to voice act, by the way. um, yeah, so it was interesting and quite a challenge, but in a fun way. And I mean, we do fudge it a little bit. I think it's in only episode like 2 or 3. I was like, all right, I need to come up with a reason why these guys keep leaving voicemails and don't just talk to each other. Um, and the reason that we came up with was, oh, I really like getting your voicemails. It feels like getting a love letter.
Yeah,
Um,
that's one of those things where it's like it just sneaks in there to make all this seem
Normal,
natural.
yeah. Because I mean, I personally hate voicemails, which is kind of funny considering. But yeah, I needed something early on to explain why they're leaving these in-depth voicemails, because otherwise it just doesn't make sense. Because most of the time when you're leaving someone a voicemail, you're expecting to talk to them, and then you get the message and you're like, hi, it's Erin. I'm calling about the couch. Call me, bye. Like
Hmm.
it's not a natural conversational flow. So once I established that conceit, it became, well, okay, now I have a bit more freedom to make these a little bit more like love letters. So they're sort of half love letter, half voicemail, really, in terms of writing, anyway.
Hmm. That was one of the other things that struck me in these early ones that I've heard is that it reminds me there's a play that's called Love Letters from somewhere in the middle '80s, I believe, by A.R. Gurney, and it's two actors on stage reading their love letters, and this is very
Yeah, yeah.
similar in that vein.
Yeah, one of my favorite books when I was a kid, it was an Australian book called Dear Mr. Sprouts. And it was, except for I think the epilogue, the entire thing was just an exchange of letters between pen pals. Um, and so I think that's probably the earliest example of this type of storytelling I can remember consuming. So that's probably the thing that started it.
Hmm.
Um, and yeah, I mean, I really enjoy it. I like hearing from because in a lot of narratives, in third person you're observing, and in first person it's extremely subjective because it's that character's experience. With this kind of, there is a proper word for it. It's like epistolatory or something. I don't know. I dropped out of high school. I don't know anything. Um, but like this style of storytelling, it gives you a partially objective, partially subjective experience with the characters, which I think is really interesting and not something you can necessarily get in a lot of other types of storytelling.
Hmm. Because it's very different from standard radio drama or even audiobooks as we know them today with the voice
Yeah.
actors.
Yeah, I love audio drama, but like the idea, like my favorite podcast drama is Wolf 359, and that is an amazing podcast. And now that I've made an audio drama podcast, I love it even more because I'm like, oh my God, how many takes did that take? How many sound effects did you have to buy or make? How did you get this together? Like I don't have the resources to make a really great traditional audio drama. But I do have the resources to make a, you know, small voicemail audio drama. And so that was actually a driving, aside from the fact that I just like that kind of found footage style of storytelling, the scope was one of the reasons it turned out the way it did, because
Hmm.
I needed something that was within my means to do.
Right. How much of your 20,000 word outline made it into actually being part of the script?
Um, this outline, it was a spectacular one. My current outline I'm working on for season two is nothing like it. But it was very much like, okay, I just need to figure out how I'm going to hit each note in the story. How do I get from A to B for each part of the story? So, I mean, pretty much all of it did get turned into the eventual script, just, rewritten.
Hmm.
Because yeah, I mean, the writing time on this was really fast. Because as I wrote that outline in 4 days. I did the first draft in November, then I sent it off to my editor, and then I did the second draft late December, January, and then sort of polished it up early February. So like that's a very short amount of time to write and edit. Like I think it worked out to be 49,000 words all up.
Okay.
Um, so in the grand scheme of things, not that many, but for what I was doing, and the time I was doing it in, it was quite a lot.
I mean, 49,000 words, at least for our listeners, that equates to what we would call here a category romance book, which
Right.
typically float right around the 50K mark.
Yeah, yeah.
So a Harlequin,
Um,
kind of book.
yeah, pretty much. All up, season one is about 6.5 hours long. So by the time the finale goes, that's how that 49,000 words translates into podcast time.
Hmm. How and you also in this, because most of the episodes, I don't think I've seen one yet that's longer than 10 minutes, maybe.
No, they're very short,
Oh,
and that's for two reasons. One, I didn't want to have to write 20-minute episodes for a weekly show. And two, I wanted it to be a weekly show. I didn't, it's very traditional for audio drama podcasts to be fortnightly or every 2 weeks. I don't know if that's bi-weekly or I don't know. We say fortnightly here in Australia.
I like
Um,
fortnightly, so that worked. That worked great for me. It's a great
yeah,
term.
so that's how most audio drama podcasts release. But I didn't want that. I wanted something weekly because I wanted because this is a very happy, fluffy thing. I wanted it to be something that people could look forward to every Tuesday, rather than going, oh, is it this week or next week that the new episode comes out?
Hmm.
So yeah, so they're short episodes because I wanted to do it weekly, and they're also short because I think they're better that way. I think that, not a lot happens in the show. It's a very slow, mundane sort of story, which after I wrote it and I was looking through some other Australian media, I realized that's a thing we do. um, and I think that if the episodes were too much longer, I think they'd be quite boring, and I don't think that they would be as good. So, yeah.
Now we know from your intro that you dabble in all kinds of media. Was this your first romance to write?
Yes, actually, it was. I it was during our we had a premiere event at the Melbourne Fringe Festival where we played the first 5 episodes with captions. Um, as sort of it was partially a marketing thing, but it was also partially that we'd all spent a year making this thing and we wanted to celebrate that.
Hmm.
Um, and during my introduction, I said, if you're familiar with my other work, this is nothing like that. My other work, my spoken word, my zine especially, tends to be quite serious and somber and dark. Not necessarily in a sad way, but I delve into heavy topics a lot. Especially in my spoken word, I deal with a lot of stuff around trauma and desire and the intersections of being trans and queer and disabled and all this kind of stuff. Yeah, this not this is not just my first romance. It's pretty much the first like non-depressing thing I've written.
What brought you to romance as you were thinking about NaNoWriMo and thinking about this podcast? How did romance become the thing you wanted to do?
I just wanted it. You know that thing of like, write what you want to read.
Hmm.
It was like that. It was like, well, do you know what I really want? I really want just something nice where, you know, like the boys end up together and no one dies and everything's nice.
Hmm.
Um, I mean, the initial elevator pitch that I tweeted about at the time was that I wanted to write a story about some boyfriends who get magic powers and hex homophobes. That was the initial um, sort of idea, and that still kind of is that. Just not until further into the season.
Yeah, I'm very
And
interested to get to the magic part.
yeah, I mean, look, I'll be honest. The magic is secondary to the interpersonal stuff, to the romance and all that kind of stuff. Like that's the important part of the podcast. The magic is, I guess, plot device more than anything else.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, I just, everything was really hard and dark, and I wanted something nice, and so I was like, well, I'll write something nice. And I actually I had a lot of trouble after I finished the first draft and sent it off to my editor, because during that week or two, that's the time where you stew over everything and you're like, oh God, I'm terrible. um, and during that time I was like, what am I doing? Like, why did I write this? Like, because I had this internalized idea that writing a happy romance story was somehow not real writing, was somehow not serious, you know what I mean? And I got over that, thankfully. And one of the things that got me over that was because I was like, well, I'm still going to make it. I'm still going to do this. And I think it was when we put out our casting call for our supporting actors, that drew a lot of people in Melbourne suddenly heard about this thing I was making, and they were like, oh, a nice love story with a happy ending. Holy shit, get me on. Oh, wait, am I allowed to swear on your podcast? I'm sorry.
Yes, that's what the explicit tag is for.
Okay, good. Sorry, I'm Australian. We don't know how to not swear. Um, and yeah, people were like, "Oh my God, like this is so good. Give me this." Everyone just really wanted something nice.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, I didn't sort of set out to get involved in romance writing, I guess. I have a friend who's a romance author. What's her pen name? God, what's her pen name for her romance stuff? Julia Liejon, I think. Um, and I really enjoy reading her stuff. And I think that was what got it percolating in the initial thing, was like, well, I want something nice. Oh, well, hang on. Every time I've read this kind of thing, it's really nice.
Hmm.
I should just do that. So, yeah.
Yeah, because I think that's one of the reasons that romance overall is the huge industry that it is, at least in the U.S.
Yeah, yeah,
Because
definitely.
everybody wants that, to know that they're picking up something that has a happily ever after in it. There may be some angst on the way, but at the end of the book, everybody ends
Yes.
happy.
And also for me, because I find in queer media, either by queers or by straight people, either way, the tragedy is everywhere. And there just isn't enough happy endings in queer fiction. And so that was like, that's why, our tagline sort of thing is we say we're about healthy relationships and happy endings,
Hmm.
because whenever there's problems, it's not because of people being mean to each other. It's not because of, like anything like that. Like everyone communicates about their feelings. They're honest with each other. They have good relationships, and everyone has a happy end ever after. And when I sent out some preview episodes to some friends to get our pull quotes for marketing, almost all of them commented on that, and they were just like, oh my God, it's so nice to consume some kind of media about romance where there's no miscommunications drawn out, for no reason, you know, like, because there's that thing, when you're watching TV and characters are being idiots and you just end up shouting at the TV, just talk
Yes.
to each other, you know.
Yes, those are my
Um,
least favorite romances to read. It's like, okay, if you two got in a room for 5 minutes.
5 minutes just said, "Hey, I'm upset about this." Like, and I mean, thankfully, that's very easy for me to write because my partner and I have been together for 10 years, and like, we, like any relationship, has its ups and downs,
Hmm.
but at no point have we ever struggled, like, we've never fought. We're always just like, oh, this thing is upsetting me, and then we talk about it, and it's fine. And unfortunately, to a lot of people, that's remarkable,
Hmm.
and I don't think it should be. I think that should be the base level for relationships.
You've mentioned good response so far. Are you getting response globally at this point in this early run of the podcast?
We are starting to, yes. The first little while it was pretty much all people in Melbourne, which is actually fine by me because that's kind of who I made it for. Because actually, that's something I haven't mentioned yet. Because in Australia, we don't have a lot of Australian media, and even less of that is queer media. So most of our media comes from America, and you get a little bit tired of never seeing people with your accent or going places that you go, interacting in ways that you interact with. And so the reason that it's set in Melbourne is so I can go, hey, this is where I live. Like when you see a friend on TV and you're like, hey, that's my friend. I wanted to do that for the city,
Hmm.
Like I wanted people from Melbourne to be able to listen to it and be like, oh, I know that place. Like, oh, I've heard of that person. Because we do weave in a lot of real life places, and people. And yeah, so initially it was pretty much all in Melbourne, but it's been expanding a little bit now. Part of, like, thanks to your review of us actually got us quite a few new listeners, and we ran an ad on the Feast of Fun podcast,
Hmm.
which that gave us a huge bump in American listeners. So Australians are still the biggest demographic consuming our podcast, but other countries are starting to trickle through as well now. Definitely the most passionate response has been from other Australians, though. And I think that, you know, part of that is just because culturally we can be like, hey, that's me, I can see myself, kind of thing. Like there's a stupid comment in, it's not a stupid comment, there's a comment in, I think, episode 1 or 2 where Kane talks about Fed Square and he loves this tapas place nearby that's really hard to get into. Now, that's actually a real place. I didn't name it, but every person who lives in Melbourne will hear that and go, oh, God, I know that place.
We've hinted at season 2 a couple times. So, and season 1 is 48 episodes, and
Yep.
so that's going to be running well into next year.
Yes.
Um,
The season finale, I think, is July 31st. Let me just check that because I put everything in my calendar so I can't forget. Um, yes, July 31st is when the finale for season 1 will air. Um, and because we do this TV development style, I am already starting season 2 right now.
is it more Jason and Kane in season 2, or are you branching to something else, or any
Um,
initial little hints of things you want to say?
Yeah, okay. I can give you a few tips. Yeah. So later on in season 1, you'll be introduced to a location, and that location will become very important to the podcast. And in season 2, we do still continue with Jason and Kane. We do also, I am adding some new characters to season 2 as well. Pardon me, which is very exciting. Um, so, like, we're not getting rid of Jason and Kane, much to my own annoyance, because voice acting as well as doing everything else was a lot of work. um, and so I'm like, oh, I wish I could write myself out, but like, you know, I we don't get our happy ending then, so I'm stuck with it now. Um, so yes, there is definitely more Jason and Kane in season 2. Um, Also, some supporting characters from season 1 will be getting their own stories as well in season 2.
Do you foresee it keeping the same voicemail format that it does now, or are you going to explore some other method of the storytelling?
It is predominantly still going to be voicemailed, yes. There may be some episodes that have extra special bits. There is actually one episode in season 1 that's not a voicemail. It's a phone call instead. So we may do some other stuff, but predominantly it will still be voicemails. Um, I have like dreams of expanding the podcast. Maybe for season 3, we'll see how we go. Um, and introducing a separate storyline with a different format, but still with that kind of found footage thing.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, actually, here's a special tip just for your listeners. One thing we're doing in season 2 is we're actually going to be having a character find some cassettes from the 80s, and we're going to play some stuff from that. So yeah, so there's going to be some new stuff.
I can only imagine what 80s cassette tapes might have on them.
Nothing too exciting. I say we're a PG podcast. We are like explicit listed because we swear a lot, but yeah.
Well, of course, you're not going to like probably license any 80s music, but I mean, certainly in the 80s,
No.
people more tape recorded stuff.
Yes, they did. And actually, one of the things I'm struggling with at the moment in writing it is trying to figure out how much or how little to mention the AIDS crisis, because like this is a happy podcast and I try to keep it that way, but not mentioning it at all feels inauthentic because it was everything back then, So I haven't quite found that balance yet, but still in outlining, so we'll see how that goes.
Interesting. Well, now I'm already eager for season 2, and I'm not even that far into season 1 yet. So, what's the best way for everyone to follow you and the podcast online?
So we've tried to make it as easy as possible. If you go to our website, loveandluckpodcast.com, you can find links to everything there, all our social media, all of the places you can listen to us. You can find us on your podcast app. We're on all the important ones. I made sure to submit us to a lot of different catchers, and we're on iTunes, of course, so even a lot of independent catchers will still have us. We also have a YouTube channel. And if you prefer your podcasts with captions, all of our episodes are captioned on YouTube, and they're captioned by hand, not by YouTube's horrible automatic captioning. So we're on Twitter as @LoveLuckPodcast. We're on Facebook as Love and Luck Podcast. We're on Tumblr as Love and Luck Podcast. We're on Instagram as Love and Luck Podcast. And I think that's all of our social media for the moment.
We'll link up to all of those in our show notes so that people can go off and find that if they're out listening to this while they're in their car or whatever. So
yes, thank you.
Easily linkable. And wish you continued success. I'm very glad that you alerted us to your existence so that we could get in on the bandwagon.
Thank you. Thank you for being so supportive. It's been like really, really nice to get such good support.